If the gospel authors contradict each other's story when it comes to these fleshy details, then shouldn't we write them off as reliable sources? Can you really believe in Jesus' resurrection when it's all based on sources in the Gospels that seemingly contradict each other? Now, we've laid out a positive case for the Gospels in another video, Can I Trust the Bible? But one of the common objections to taking the Gospels seriously comes down to the differences between the accounts, especially when it comes to the Easter story. Thoughtful skeptics challenge Christians to read the Gospels horizontally or side by side, exposing how Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John differ when it comes to the details of the Easter story. How many women were mentioned going to the tomb? What were their names? Was the stone removed when they got there? Or who and what did they see? The skeptics point, well, if the gospel authors contradict each other's story when it comes to these fleshy details, then shouldn't we write them off as reliable sources? So how do we make sense of the differences across the gospel accounts in the Easter story? Do contradictions disprove the resurrection? Well, the simple answer is no. The alleged contradictions between the Gospels does nothing to hopelessly undermine the credibility of this story. In fact, you might be surprised, because on deeper investigation, these differences, to me, actually shine a light on exactly why you should take the Gospels seriously. Let me parse out 3 different reasons why. First, even if genuine contradictions were present across the Gospels, that actually strengthens the historical core of the Easter story, rather than undermining it. Why? Because it proves that the 4 Gospels represent 4 independent and early traditions about Jesus' resurrection, rather than just one account which is being regurgitated 4 times. I mean, imagine a detective if he interviewed 4 different eyewitnesses for their account of a particular crime, and each one of them, in response, repeated the same script to him verbatim. That would be suspicious, right? It looks an awful lot like collusion. Because different accounts, they tend to spotlight different details or have a unique perspective, depending on the vantage point and the psychological state of the witness. Detectives expect such variation in the peripheral details on genuine eyewitness testimony, and they'd have no problem calling such witnesses to establish the core truth of the story. And that's what we have with the 4 Gospels. Substantial agreement with only circumstantial variety, which is characteristic of truthful human testimony. Second, even if you're tempted to be suspicious of the Gospels, at worst, a genuine contradiction would only call into question one source, not 2. I mean, imagine you had 2 eyewitnesses and they offered irreconcilable testimony about one detail in the case. Well, there's no reason to assume that both eyewitnesses are wrong. It might just be one who's mistaken or misremembering and the other is still factually correct. So while genuine contradictions might be a problem for some wooden doctrine of biblical inerrancy, one that wants to affirm that all scripture is without error, it doesn't lead to throwing out all the Gospels as historical sources. But again, this is still assuming that the differences in the Easter story can't be meaningfully explained or reconciled, which leads to a final point. Third, nearly all of the alleged contradictions in the Gospel accounts of the Easter story can be harmonized. And take the women, for example. John's Gospel records that Mary Magdalene went to the tomb on Easter Sunday morning. Matthew adds that another Mary went with her, and Mark that Salome was there too, and Luke records this catch-all phrase, the women. But these surface-level differences do not equal contradictions. To say that Mary went, well, that's true. To say that 2 Marys went, or that 3 or more women went, that can also be true at the same time. Because like with recounting any true story from our lives, the details offered are rarely exhaustive. We spotlight, honing in on relevant details or perspectives to suit the purposes of our retelling. And similar literary features, things like compression, can be applied to reconcile all of the alleged contradictions in the Easter story. Renowned scholars like G.E. Ladd have even laid out plausible harmonizations, showing a 17-step timeline that incorporates all of the testimony about the Easter story collected across the 4 Gospels. The bottom line, the differences in the Gospel accounts are not some skeptical silver bullet. Far from it. They actually serve a reason to take the Easter story seriously. Why? Because they show that in the Gospels we have 4 independent and early eyewitness traditions that all together testify to the same core facts of history. That on that first Easter Sunday, Jesus' tomb was discovered empty by women followers. People who later, along with the male disciples, had these life-changing experiences when they bumped into someone they didn't expect, Jesus. And they discovered that their good friend was no longer this pulverized corpse in a cold tomb, but that he was a resurrected witness to the truth of the Christian story and the solid hope of the gospel. So don't believe this skeptical hype. something remarkable really did happen on the dawn of Easter Sunday. And since truth invites questioning, why not investigate the historical reliability of these Gospels with fresh eyes for yourself? Because who knows, you might just bump into Jesus for yourself too.
Dan here from Questioning Christianity. Thanks so much for checking us out. We are all about helping you connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. So if you're enjoying the content, make sure you subscribe and click the bell on YouTube, and then go ahead and follow us on socials.